Hey everyone, it's Rue Campbell here for, I believe, what's going to air as our first full episode of Cloud Conversations of 2022. And today I'm joined by our guest, who I'll introduce very shortly, but I'm also joined, I think for the first time, depending on when this ends, by my co-host, Azure. So Azure, how are you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
Yeah, good,
Long
good.
time no see.
Yes, long time no see. You've had a costume change, I haven't. So we'll see if anyone picks up on that.
Don't
Yeah, I
let
know.
them know what happens behind the curtain. The magic.
Yep, it's been a busy day. Busy day.
Yes.
So I will. I've got the pleasure of introducing this episode's guest. So Alex Fields joined us, and Alex is a Microsoft MVP who runs itpromentor.com, specializes in Microsoft 365 for small to medium sized businesses, and as it says on his Twitter, he is a real, actual human being, and he joins us now. So, Alex, how are you doing?
Well, thanks, Rue. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm doing really good. It's actually I just recovered from a little bout of COVID here in the States. I think everyone's getting this Omicron or whatever that's going around. It was fairly mild or whatever, but still it was just hacking and coughing for like the last week. So today is like the second day I've not had to woken up with a bunch of phlegm and stuff. So I feel pretty good.
Right, good.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I've got you on a good day.
Yeah. I'm glad you're recovering.
Yeah, it's true though. Everyone seems to be getting this new variant, and like you said, most folks it seems to be quite mild. I know my parents had it, and they were okay after a few days. But glad you're feeling better. So I guess I think about the kind of stuff that you focus on, and what I'd really like to start picking your brains on is really around this focus that you seem to have on the small to medium sized business space, right? Because when we talk about Microsoft 365, we think that big E5 license that costs a lot of money, targeted at massive customers, and you focus on the smaller guys, right? Can you talk to me a little bit about how you came to focus on that kind of environment?
Absolutely. So I actually grew up in a small business. So my dad owned a construction company and leasing and land development firm and they probably had about I don't know, like 30 employees for most of the time that I was involved with the business as I was growing up and stuff. And I was obviously like the smart kid who knew too much about computers and whatnot. So I got all the jobs related to the computers and technology of the business when I was growing up. So like even at the age of like 16 years old, I was helping my team at the Landcore Companies is the name of the business, whatever, set up an exchange server so they could get email at landcore.com, right? They could have all this
Cool.
stuff. So yeah, so I actually worked in the small business environment for just that was my first exposure to it, like as a teenager, just like that was some of the first jobs I had, right? And so then after I went away to college, I came back to work, and my parents had been shutting down the business by that point in time, and I decided to go to work for a managed services provider who did this for a lot of other businesses and whatnot. So I worked for a managed services provider for like 15 years, and and I just learned a whole lot through that process. And obviously things shifted and changed a lot over time, and we had this big move to the cloud and whatnot. And I was pretty much on the forefront of that, like trying to figure out like how do we solve some of these new problems now that so many people are. I mean, shadow IT was kind of the first thing, right? Like we have all these people starting to go to the cloud before we're even ready to bring them there. And how do we get out ahead of that stuff? And so even before Microsoft 365 Business Premium was available, I was looking at other ways of solving those problems and trying to figure out how we could help customers stay secure as they started moving into cloud-based apps and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, that's been my whole history. I've only ever known the small business, and it's interesting because I've had offers to work at larger companies, including Microsoft, and I've never been able to accept them because I can't imagine myself working for like a massive enterprise, like where I'm just like a small cog in the wheel or something like that. I really, really, really love the small business environment. I love how small businesses have like, it's almost like a second family, So
you are the wheel then, right? Like,
what?
I said you are the wheel then. You are
right, yeah.
Yeah. All of the wheels.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a good. I've worked really big companies and really small companies. Company I'm currently with is the smallest company I've ever worked for, but you do get a bit more of a closer feel. The CEO is only like a phone call away compared to being surrounded by layers and layers and layers of bureaucrats, it is a little bit different.
Yeah, totally.
So I get, as far as IT goes, how different is it for a small business than the big ones? Is it just a case of it's the same stuff but different numbers, or do they have unique problems that need solving?
Well, like I said, not having worked in really large companies, I don't have a lot of context to compare it to. Although I guess I've brushed up against some organizations that are connected to larger ones, either through mergers, acquisitions, stuff like that. I think that obviously budget is a huge concern in the SMB, and then that's why when we look at things like the E5 SKU, most small businesses, aren't really going to be doing that unless they have some really stringent requirements, or they have a bigger budget because they're in the financial services industry and they really need that extra protection or something. But for most part, people need affordable solutions. If you come to them with like a $57 per month plan, they're just like, this is a non-starter. That's not going to work for them. So that's why this business premium SKU that I've been spending so much time in and trying to understand what are the limitations of that SKU, what can we do with that, what can we accomplish with that SKU, how far can we bring people along the journey, right? That I've really tried to help people maximize their value in that. And when it comes to Microsoft 365, but yeah, I mean, budget is huge, but they still have the same needs. That's the frustrating give and take. Like, there's still a lot of the same problems they want to solve. They still want to have access to good, modern technology, but they're not going to be willing to spend as much either. So it's kind of interesting. And then it's the when you are in a small business, very few small businesses have their own internal IT resources. They might have like a person who has like some quasi technological skills, right? There's like a part-time hat they wear or whatever to work with the technology a little bit, but mostly they need to outsource, especially if they want to do anything more advanced. Even it's kind of funny, even though I encourage people to outsource, obviously IT needs when they're in the small business. I'm not very good at outsourcing. So like I was just talking to you before this broadcast started about my website. We're kind of trying to update it and stuff. And I don't know very much about WordPress myself. And I was struggling trying to figure out how I can make things look better and modernize it a little bit. And I just finally decided, this is something that I don't have the time or the desire to learn this, so I need to outsource it, right? Yep. And so it's the same thing in the small business. Like, if a lot of people, they get into like a good SKU like Microsoft 365, or they're picking up some other cloud-based platform, Salesforce or something like that, there's a lot these tools can do. And most small businesses, they realize that they're not getting the value that they could get out of these tools, but they also don't really have the time or enough desire really to spend the time it takes to learn those things, and then apply them in their business. So if someone could come in and help accelerate them along that curve, and just say, here's what you do. This is what we'll get this set up for you, so that all you have to do is click a couple buttons and then you're good to go, right? Mm-hmm. That is huge. That's huge. And then, so that's kind of what, what we're trying to focus on. And it's really changed, like for the MSP industry, I feel like things have changed quite a lot with the introduction of these new cloud platforms like Microsoft 365, because it's just it's a really different landscape than it was back when what we used to do for businesses was set up their networks and their devices and their servers and all these things, and they needed all that stuff to work. But they, now it's something fundamentally different. It's about driving value in the business, right? It's trying to figure out, how can I do things that I couldn't do yesterday, right? That's actually a lot more exciting. And so it's totally changed the landscape. And I think, actually Azure could probably speak to a lot of this even more, is just, especially with the Power Platform, right? Like, this is an interesting area because small businesses now, like that app development light, or even just starting to use some basic tools like Power Automate to make some of their lives easier, right? That kind of thing is huge. And it's probably the area that I think is least exploited, the least taken advantage of by MSPs. Still, a lot of MSPs are still thinking about just caring for devices, right? And just monitoring and patching and, providing updates and stuff like that. And that's yeah, that's fine, but that's not really where the future's at, right?
Yeah.
So
you're thinking about forward thinking. Okay, what's next? You maintain what you have, you update what you have, but then what is this next step? And I'd say it's not uncommon, even in our platform. A lot of folks networks are welcoming it with open arms, but I've also seen businesses where they're very hesitant about it because they don't quite know it's still very new to them. And so having somebody external, like you said, they don't have the time to learn. There's so much to learn, right? I can fully understand that somebody would outsource what they need. I'd say like on my end where I work, what I love about Power Platform is I know the people and I know the needs. Like they can come to me with a business problem, like actually understand the business problem. Where I can understand the outsourcing may or may not give, it'll give you a product, but it may not give you exactly what tailors to use when it comes to Power Platform. So that was the interesting thing to me as a technician to solve your business problem. Because there are ways of working and like standard operating procedures, how do you fit all that into your solution? I find it's a lot of fun, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess kind of thinking about that a bit wider than Alex. So is the kind of, if the legacy way of doing IT outsourcing is I will set up your email server and I will make sure that stuff comes in and out, is the modern way of doing it, and I use the word modern because everything's modern now, Microsoft, etc.
Yep.
Is the modern way of doing that then, when you say it's about providing value, is it about saying, well, Microsoft kind of already take care of your email server, so we will educate you on what else is possible. Power Platform, your vulnerability to build in-house apps, that kind of thing. Is that where MSP should be headed?
Yeah, definitely. So I kind of have this idea that there's about three major categories of opportunity that I see for MSPs. One of those opportunities is still in the traditional management. Like you have what we call modern management. So it's just taking what we used to do and then just modernizing it with some newer tools like Intune and stuff like that, where we can manage devices in a sort of data center independent way, right? Where you can be anywhere in the world and we can still keep you up to date and stuff like that, and make sure that you have access to the tools you need, and we can monitor your security and maintain your policies and stuff like that. And that's all still important, but I still think, again, it's to a small business, a lot of them, they don't care about that. They know it has to happen or whatever, but it's not really a value added service. It's just sort of like keeping the lights on. It's like paying the utility bill, right? It's nothing for them. The value added stuff, that's another opportunity, and that is helping organizations learn how to use the apps that they have access to better than they did before. And so the way I'd like to put this is, when I was a kid, I used to go with my mom sometimes to her work. She worked at the Star Tribune in Minneapolis, which is like a newspaper. She was one of the bean counters, like an accountant or whatever. And I can remember going there, and like she had a computer for the first time at her job, and there were people training her desk side and like showing her how to use the ledger and stuff like that. And like that, just like thinking back to that, when people went from like taking like a paper ledger and then moved to a computerized ledger, right, for the first time, a lot of folks haven't realized this yet, but like the transition that we have made in the last decade or so to these cloud-based apps where there's so much more capability, so much more power, so many more features that are coming out all the time. It's like hard to keep up with. It's as big of a technological shift as that, right? It's as big as a technological shift, and people haven't like fully taken advantage of that yet. They haven't fully. Some people hasn't even really set in, because it's still kind of like, oh, I still use Word, I still use Excel. They still kind of look the same. But it's not. There's like so much more power now, and some businesses are starting to wake up to that, and they're realizing that they can make their lives easier. They can potentially automate some tasks and stuff like that, and they can start to do things that they just didn't have it just wasn't possible for them before. So that's huge. Yeah, that's a huge opportunity. And then of course the third opportunity is security and compliance, which is become more and more important. I think there's going to be a lot more legislation and stuff in pretty much everywhere across the Western nations, as far as just maintaining certain privacy laws, maintaining certain like minimum standards, right? There's been so much damage caused, especially in the last year or so. Here we've seen so many cyber incidents and stuff, major high-level cyber incidents, and it's starting to get a lot of attention. And then the governments realize that we need to do more to help fight this. And in the small businesses, it's going to be really challenging for them, because they don't really have the resources to to take care of security. So we're trying to figure out how to get ahead of this and how to make sure that we can make it very affordable for them, and also to kind of keep them in alignment with some some best practices that'll keep them secure, keep them compliant, stuff like that. So that's like another opportunity for MSPs, and I think a lot of MSPs are probably focusing on that, probably a little more so than the value side of things. I think that the value, like I said, I think the value side is probably the least exploited right now. And it's so people are still catching up with that one and realizing what's possible. And again, a lot of it's like even the MSPs don't know. It's like it's not something that they're doing very well yet. So they have to learn how to use these tools better, right? They could learn from someone like from Azure, right? They could learn quite a lot before they can start then going out and turning around and helping small businesses achieve the same. So yeah.
Yep. No, it's an interesting point about the inevitability of more regulation, right? Security aside, there's always going to be more regulation, and it's the small businesses that are going to struggle most about that, because it's harder for them to justify, we'll just hire someone else to do it, right? The smaller you are, always the more painful it is to have to add that extra budget on another person. And so I guess on that point, when we look at the Microsoft 365 stuff, they give a score for everything, right? You've got your secure score, your compliance score, and all that. Should kind of, if I'm offering IT services as an outsourcer, is there the value add there in that, and kind of holding the customer's hand through, here's what we can do for you, here's the upcoming regulations, and we will be your provider of making sure you stay compliant with them. Is that an appropriate place for an MSP to be?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is. It's in the way that I would actually suggest that they do that is that it's really going to be a shared responsibility model between the MSP and then the small business. Ultimately, the small business has to take some responsibility for their own security. Like, it can't just outsource it 100%. It's really not going to be possible, even though people would love to do that. But really, there are some things that, like, the MSP has to be able to articulate what is it that the customer is responsible for, and what is it that we're responsible for. What are the promises that we're making versus what are the promises that the customers have to uphold, right? And they have to help them understand, what their responsibilities are, and then as well, they have to uphold their end of the bargain. So whatever they promise to do for that customer, they have to, meet those promises every month or whatever their agreement is based on. So, yeah, absolutely. And it's, it's not super easy to figure that out, and it's a little bit different depending on where you live. So, like, for example, different governments have different things they recommend that you kind of focus on. And so, like, here in this country, it depends on what industry you're in. We don't really have like a GDPR or anything like that, like we do in Europe, for example. It's not something that applies evenly across the board. So if you're in healthcare, you got to look at HIPAA, right? If you're in the financial services industry, you got to look at FINRA and some of those other issues there. The SEC rules, SEC 17A-4, how do we stay compliant with our, like if we had an email server, like how much data do we need to keep and stuff, like how long do we need to keep this information? All kinds of like issues, and it all kind of depends on where you're at least in this country. But then in Australia, for example, they have this really nice little framework called the Australian Essential 8, and the government kind of encourages people to say, hey, you should at least do these 8 essential things, no matter what type of business you are. And so that's kind of nice to have that like more pointed direction. They know they can at least, do these things to kind of maintain their baseline. And so here, I would suggest that even though there's, there are some sort of verticals or some special areas like HIPAA or whatever, you could get really good at just servicing the healthcare industry. That's one option for MSPs to really specialize in something. And another option is to basically have a standard cybersecurity framework. And I usually recommend, coming from the MSP where I used to work, the CIS Security Controls. So the CIS puts out this list of controls. I believe the latest version has only 18 controls, so it's not a very complex system.
Yeah.
And that is a great place for most small businesses to start, regardless of where you're at in the world. I mean, it's just a really solid baseline for anyone to consider, is just take a look at these critical security controls, have a provider help you to, work through this list and apply some of the technologies like we see in Microsoft 365 toward answering some of those controls, right? So that's, that's a really good way to approach it, I think, especially because, again, here in the United States, we don't really have like a central body or central recommendation as far as like, here are some requirements that you should be thinking about. I think that these independent frameworks are a really good place to begin. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
You also brought up, around that there's no central guidances. I also think that, right, the technology is advancing faster than I think we can put in regulations, right? As soon as you put something in, it might be outdated because of how fast things move, right? I feel it's even hard to keep up with what's going on too. And I don't work anywhere in IT or security, so I can only imagine what a challenge it is to keep current with things. And also not have the time to explore something new either, because it's just like, okay, we got to make sure that we keep up with the times, or if Microsoft is deploying something new, you're just trying to keep current with what they're doing and make sure it's set in place. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, a really simple example of that is just around password requirements. Like a lot of compliance requirements out there will still make reference to practices that are not considered best practice anymore in the cybersecurity industry. Microsoft has password guidance that they put out that basically says, don't try to make passwords overly complex. Don't try to rotate them super often. Instead, you should focus your efforts on things like multi-factor.
Yeah.
But so if you're following what is recommended today, like that's actually, you're not going to be meeting some of the compliance requirements that you're still going to run into out there, where they're going to say rotate your passwords, make sure they're super complex, all the stuff that we're not supposed to do. So it's just really funny. Yeah, it's totally true.
From the user end, right? Like I work at a larger company, probably got like 120,000 people applied, and so things change so quickly for us. I think we're junior. I don't know how people are junior masters, but it's pretty often. And then these guidances, come down from IT, like, we can't do this anymore. We can't do that anymore. And they're like, well, wait, we just got adjusted to this. I would say even at my site, per se, the transition, we were talking about the transition for small businesses to like, let's think more cloud-based. People are still very much in the sphere of, like you said, we have Microsoft Word. We're just going to send a copy of this document. I was on an email chain 2 weeks ago, and it was like nine copies of this document. We've talked about sharing links before, but even that concept is still relatively new to people. I would say if this is what you've done traditionally, right? Sticking to tradition, it works. And trying to get people up to speed. I get while you're managing everything else, that this is not your job to know what technologies are available to you. Even if you have your own training, I can always say, like, I don't remember what that was. I'm just going to go back to what I'm used to. It may not necessarily be the most efficient way to do it.
Yeah.
The attachment thing is a good example. That one always gets me, because talking to other, even folks in IT security, they don't like the idea of folks sharing they don't like the folks sharing links outside. They want them to just use attachments. And I kind of have to remind them, well, if you share a link, you've got control over that. You can very easily cut the tie and get rid of that shared link. You send an attachment, for the most part, that thing's gone and you have no control over it.
That's really true. In our organization, you can't share outside of GSK. I work for GSK, so you can't even share outside, like that option is turned off. So you can only share within the org anyway. But you're right. I hadn't even thought about, if it's a physical copy of the document, you could still ship that out. There aren't any email requirements to say that you can't email outside the organization. So, that one's a good one. I hadn't thought about that.
Well, I'll leave it with you. You can you can take that up.
It's
but
true.
It's just little things like that there's. I appreciate the kind of knee-jerk reaction to saying, "Oh, this is different. Maybe we don't want to do it," but think about it in its totality and think about all the implications. And I guess so. One of the other things I wanted to pick up with you, Alex, was you talk about how fast the landscape changes and everything. Nowadays in security, we kind of have this concept, which is it's a more widely accepted term now, but certainly 3, 4, 5 years ago, the term EDR, endpoint detection and response, it didn't really exist. Nobody was talking about EDR to the way they are now. And now, and I'm going to say in large part thanks to the efforts of folks like you, within even the business premium license of Microsoft 365, you get that EDR platform, you get Defender for Business, right? And I am seeing in a lot of these kind of benchmarks and recommendations and frameworks that organizations should have EDRs to monitor what's going on in the background. Could you maybe tell our viewers what is so good about an EDR? How does it differ from traditional antivirus, and what is Defender for Business in that context?
Yeah. So this is actually something that I get to gloat about a little bit, because I think you're right that in part this product, Microsoft Defender for Business, exists because of me. This is actually kind of an interesting thing that the team at Microsoft who's responsible for the Business Premium SKU, has been following my blog for a long time. And a long time ago, I had written a little bit of a scathing review of Business Premium, saying like they missed one thing that I really, really wish they hadn't, because we basically just have like the antivirus essentially included. What was originally included. And if you want to get into anything in the security space, it's pretty much all in E5. Like anything significant where we're not just talking about trying to prevent bad things from happening. We have to realize that you can't prevent every bad thing from happening. Sometimes there's going to be stuff that gets through. And when that happens, you need to have some antenna to like alert you to the fact that there's something bad has happened. And so on the other side of that post breach, right, that post breach activity, we just didn't have anything included in the SKU that really gave us any kind of feelers or understanding of what's going on there. And so we were always relying on third-party things. So like MSPs always have to sell, third-party endpoint security products and other things to help cover their customers. So it's up to the MSP to put that together, and then create a package and sell it to customers that's over and above what they're buying in their productivity suite. So I said that this is a huge miss, and I railed on that for a while. And they were paying attention enough to then bring me in and say, why is it that you think that small businesses need this? I'm like, well, they need it just like large organizations need it, right? Like they're running into the same threats, they run into some of the same stuff. And the antivirus piece is really, really important. Obviously, you want to be able to prevent the things that are known to be bad, but those are all just based on signatures, and it's fairly trivial thing to just change something minor about about your virus or about your malware or whatever, and then it's not detectable anymore. It's like it's beyond the reach of antivirus. So having something in that behavioral based detection and response, where it's like, okay, I'm seeing some activities here that are not normal or shouldn't really be happening on a typical information worker's desktop. That's an indication that some of these things that they could be malicious. They could be, and we need to shut them down, right? So having that capability, it was already out there. It existed in the E5 SKU, and I'm like, why don't we have some of that, at least parts of this, into the Business Premium SKU? And so now we have it. I'm super happy that I got to be part of fighting for that in the SMB. So it's super cool. And actually, I got even more than I hoped for, which is really awesome. I think the only thing they left out was the hunting capability, which I understand. I think that even where small businesses have outsourced IT to like a MSP provider, a lot of those MSPs probably aren't going to have like a full-time dedicated SOC where they're like specialized security engineers and stuff, and hunting that data is probably not going to be something they're doing day to day. So I understand that. And for those who want to do that, they still can. They just have to get like a SIM or an outside API where they can connect and pull that data and then query it. So if they want to use Azure Sentinel or something like that, they can. But that aside, just having all of the other capabilities as far as the endpoint detection response, some of the more advanced attack surface reduction rules and stuff like that, that's really huge. And couldn't be prouder to see that come to pass. And Microsoft definitely did us a solid there for just even including it in the cost. We don't have to buy it separately. It's included now in this Business Premium SKU. It's really solid. So
yeah, no, for sure, and it is something you should be proud of it. Because I remember reading, I think it's that blog, and you're talking about how you get Defender antivirus Business Premium, but it's not really what should be. You don't get any reporting for what the point something happens if you don't find out. I remember reading that maybe a couple of years ago now, and then with the news, we're getting this Defender for Business. Wow, it's the full shebang, it's everything. Basically, it was the full thing. So no, you should be proud of that. And any Business Premium customers out there, say thanks to Alex, because it was him that did it. We all know. And so I get following on from that. And speaking of the full kit and caboodle, one of the things that you sell and make available, I guess, to internal IT or external IT, is a series of your own guides and your own frameworks and recommendations, and you publish those on Gumroad. Could you talk to me a little bit about what kind of offerings you have there?
Oh yeah, I mean, when I was learning a lot about rolling out Microsoft 365 to SMB organizations and just how do we think about consuming this massive set of products and what are some of the basic configurations that I would put into place right away for almost any business that I'm working with. As I was going through and doing that a few times in the beginning, I started documenting what I was doing, and I wanted to have like a checklist that I could easily repeat. So I even scripted some of it and whatnot. Anyway, I put all that together and I was like, hey, this isn't just valuable for me, this is valuable for the world, right? So I put it up for sale and on Gumroad, and yeah, I mean, I've had thousands of downloads of this stuff now, so it's really cool. Like, a lot of people have responded really well to it. I get compliments on it all the time. I try to update it
Nice.
like a couple times a year because there's all new features coming in and they change things and stuff moves around, right? So I try to stay on top of it. I'm actually doing some updates right now, so I should be releasing those by the end of the month when the website goes live with the new updates and stuff. So yeah, it's been a fun project. People really like it. I'm just glad that's something I decided to do. It was kind of a whim. I didn't think I was going to make that much from it. I was just like, I'm just going to throw this up for sale and see how it goes. And like I said, I've sold thousands of copies now. It's actually quite big.
Nice.
So yeah.
There's that value that we're talking about, right? Like, people see the value in this and it's making a difference.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's like, like you kind of said, if you're doing it and it benefits you, then there's a lot of other folks out there in your position, right? So why not make it available? That's a good attitude to have. And as far as the kind of the details, what kinds of things can folk learn from it? Are we just talking security, or what's the kind of bullet points of things folks will learn from this toolkit?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. I've added so many things to it over the time over the time that I've been. I actually wrote a book on Microsoft 365 Business Premium that describes like migration and configuration and everything like that. So all the like how to migrate to a platform like this, if you've never done that before, is part of it as well. But yeah, it's best practices around setting up some of the different platforms like Azure AD and identity, Intune and devices, stuff like that, and then as well data protection. So that's one of the areas that I just spent a little bit more time on that because in the recent updates to the CIS controls, they actually took data protection, used to be control number 13. So the list is sort of pre-prioritized, and they moved that all the way up to priority number 3. So it's control number 3 now. So it's considered to be pretty important. And so I wanted to have a publication that focused a little bit more effort, because I've also noticed when I've worked with other MSPs and so forth, it's probably one of the areas they're spending the least amount of time on. But here we're being told by the CIS and other places like this, all they do is cybersecurity, right? They're like, hey, you got to start thinking about data protection as a more important, element now. It's with that shift that we've taken to the cloud, and we're using all types of different personal devices and everything in the mix too, and it's not really stored in a central repository behind your own firewall anymore. That's really changed the game. And it's like, how can we apply some protections at the level of the data, right? And so what I did is I just in that guide, for example, I try to do it from the perspective of like the CIS controls from this like independent perspective, and say, here's what they're saying we should focus on. Here are the safeguards they lay out in that control number 3. How does Microsoft help to solve those? And so that's an example of what's in there. Here are the ways that you can start to bring some of that value to customers. And when you start talking about things like these sensitivity labels and such, and there are some realities to the limitations there too. They're like, when you up your security, you tend to cause an impact somewhere else. It's always a trade-off, right? There's going to be some collaboration features get degraded, but having an idea what those are, or what you can expect. So when you turn these things on, and how can we give them a very simple framework that doesn't impact their productivity too much, but also gives them some new powerful capabilities to manage that data, as an example. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, awesome. And it's one of those things that I'll admit, I'm always kind of shocked at how neglected it seems to be when you talk to folks who, focus on security, talking about the actual data protection, with data encryption and things like that. It seems to be kind of more neglected in favor of defending the system. What about the data on that system? I'll be honest, I talked to a lot of Microsoft security experts that have never touched stuff like sensitivity labels. And I'm kind of thinking, well, you're missing out on a lot here, because the data is what everyone's trying to get to just now. That's the valuable part. All the ransomware attacks, these extortion efforts, they're trying to get to that data anyway. So it always kind of shocks me. And I guess if anyone's listening to this and is interested in that, how you can leverage that Microsoft license to protect that data, we'll put a link in the show notes to your data protection toolkit, and folks can check that out.
Cool.
On that same point, because you're a very busy guy, you also publish courses on Teachable, I think it is.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff can folk learn on there?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually kind of an interesting thing. What the courses are is actually I have a group that I run, like a peer group where people, other MSPs mostly, but there's some customers direct in there, some direct customers of IT internal. And they'll come to my courses to learn about something. Like we'll take a topic, like maybe we do sensitivity labels 1 month or something, and they'll show up and we'll record the presentation. So I give a presentation, we do Q&A at the end, so I get the Q&A recorded as well in case there's some things that weren't clear or people wanted more detail on. And then I usually have a few pre-prepared labs that people can do, like just walkthroughs, like do these things. Here's a demo, use a demo tenant. Here's how you get a demo tenant. If you haven't ever done that before, if you're a partner, you should have access to demos.microsoft.com, or what we call the transform portal. So we go through some of those things, and we just do some of that work together. And some people, have said that, this has helped them take and pass exams with Microsoft, which is great. I didn't even think of that. I was like, it's probably a good idea. Like I could probably even just do a course just around preparing for an exam, but I didn't even think of that. I was just trying to help people with their jobs, just how can we take some of these capabilities and learn how to use them and how to apply them in a small business setting. So I was recording these, together, and then we decided hey, we should put these up so the people who participated can continue to have access to them in perpetuity. And then some people still just want to go buy the courses and attend at any time, right? It won't be live. We won't have the live Q&A anymore, but they can still go and take those courses. So that's another option out there if folks want to consume. Some people learn better by reading. Some people learn better, stuff like this, right? Podcasts or video and things like that. So I try to cater to all the different learning styles, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I know that it's funny. I used to always think I was best at learning by reading. Like I was the kind of total dork that would just sit there reading a book about Windows Server. Like I'm on the train reading a book about Windows Server. Who does that? But over the last few years, I need to get my hands, I need to get on the keyboard and mouse. I need to do it. I don't know why, but it's good that you've kind of got that diversity and learning opportunities, right? It's because no one's going to learn the same.
Right.
Awesome. Good stuff. And so I guess, as far as the kind of other stuff you're working on, where folks can find you online, is there anything we kind of haven't discussed already that you're up to that you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I've like I said, in the last month here, I've just been really busy with back end stuff. So updating the website, working with a developer on that. And I previously, the way I'd run the peer-to-peer group, I think has been a little hokey. So we're trying to update that a little bit too. So I've got this membership plugin that I'm working on. So if anyone has WordPress, it's this plugin called AR Member, which I looked at a lot of different ones and I really like this one. I think it's the simplest and easiest to use for me, at least. Cool. So it's a lot of back end stuff that I'm learning right now and working through to try to make 2022 even better than 2021. That kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, I think we covered pretty much all the ground. I think I've watched a few of these cloud conversations, and we normally end, talking about movies like Terminator and, what else correct. Are you interested in and stuff like that. So I'm assuming that's what's coming next, but I don't want to get into it.
Yeah, no.
I actually had as someone who doesn't work in IT security, I had maybe some dumb questions.
Go for it.
So I recently bought a little over a year ago, I bought a new computer, right? And Microsoft Defender was already installed on it. And here I'm thinking very old school, do I need to buy Norton antivirus or McAfee or anything like that, right? And I went into my group chat for my technical stuff. They're like, no, you don't have to worry about that anymore. I'm like, wait, when did these updates happen, right? I haven't had to buy a personal computer. So where would you, with things like Microsoft Defender, future is for companies like Norton or McAfee. Are they transitioning with the times too to keep up with Microsoft, or are they still in this standard platform of nobody buys CDs anymore, but you download this to protect your computer from antivirus? How do they compare? Do you think that they're going to go away, or they're going to pivot like what they're doing? What do you think?
Great question.
It is a good question. I mean, time will tell. I mean, obviously Microsoft is a competitor to some of these other. Microsoft is a security company now too, right? So they do have they're in competition with other endpoint security vendors out there, and I think a lot of them are feeling kind of nervous now that it's included in Business Premium, where they get that full-bodied EDR solution and everything. That's making a lot of companies nervous. But I will say that there are some people out there who are, I think, a little bit further ahead of the game on this and how they're thinking about things. So I'll give you an example. There's a company called Acronis, and they have an endpoint security solution. But one of the things their endpoint security solution could do is, instead of using their engine, they can actually manage. You can use it to manage the Microsoft space. So this is a cool thing for MSPs, because it can basically say, okay, if you want to use Defender, then we have a management interface for that can give you some good information and feedback and whatnot. Because in the Microsoft space, they're working on trying to build like a multi-tenant view where you can see all your customers and see various alerts and stuff, but it's not 100% there yet. And so if another vendor can step in and make this easier to manage, make it to take some of that information, like, hey, you got an attack surface reduction rule that just threw an alert or something, and you can start to surface some of that in an easy way. And it's also where you happen to manage other aspects of your environment. They can that's where they can start to add some more value, I think, is when they start to think of themselves as almost a layer over the top of, or an extension on top of what Microsoft is natively offering. I think that's kind of interesting. Not everyone's doing that. Obviously, some people just continue to compete with Microsoft, which is also fine. Obviously, there's some people who will always like their third-party flavor more than they'll say, like, hey, well, I really like this or this about this third party, so I'm going to go with them instead of Microsoft. And that's fine. You'll see some of that. I tend to just think like, small businesses, because I'm thinking of their budget and everything. What's the most, like, how can I maximize what I'm already paying for? I'm going to pay for all my stuff in Microsoft anyways. Like, I still got to have all my productivity apps. I still got to have access to my email and my files and stuff. And if it happens to come with this, do I need to buy that again? Do I have to spend that money again? And I tend to think not. That's just my approach to it. And so it's really just about, like, how do I leverage what I have, to the fullest extent? And then for the people who are saying, like, gosh, I'm still missing something. I wish I'd had this, or I wish I had that, or I wish I had a better way of managing it. Then they can look at some of those third-party tools to do that. Yeah.
Awesome. Good stuff. And because I'm such a unabashed fanboy, I'll just say, don't buy any of the third-party stuff. just stick with Defender. It sounds like if you're a consumer and you've just bought a laptop for home use, looking at some of the news where was it? I think it's Avast and Avira. They used to be free. Now they've been bought by Symantec, and they're installing crypto miners on the free versions.
Oh yeah.
It's like you're almost as, I don't know. That just doesn't sit well with me.
It's weird.
Yeah, I would expect that from the Edge team, but not from the Defender team. But yeah, so I guess in terms of closing out the show, I think you hit the nail on the head, Alex. We have historically finished the show asking folks the kind of joke question about, do they prefer Terminator 1 and Terminator 2? I was thinking of phasing that out this year, but seeing as you brought it up,
yes.
Do you have a preference? And I guess just as a general question, outside of IT, what do you do to relax, switch off, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, awesome. Well, I guess I'll start with the Terminator question, just because it's always a fun one for me, because I actually do have some nostalgic memories of Terminator 2 in particular, because when I was a kid, growing up, I wasn't allowed to watch rated R films for a long time when I was like, So my friend Robbie and I, when his parents were away, he had pay-per-view at his house, and they had actually bought, his parents had bought Terminator or whatever, and it was still available. So like when his parents left town, we actually got to watch Terminator 2, which we felt was like, it just seemed like, oh, we're getting away with murder here, is this girl, And so that was like one of the first like rated R films that I saw, like kind of like on the DL or whatever. No, I was just a kid, so I'll always have a special place in my heart, Terminator 2. But and it's funny, I think I didn't even see the first Terminator until I was like in college or something. Honestly, I just like never got around to it. And it maybe just because I didn't like it as much as Terminator 2. It was because the Terminator 2 for me was always like that was my first Terminator experience, and I just really loved it,
Yeah, I totally echo that sentiment, because again, it was the first one I seen, and I just thought, this is the most badass thing I've ever seen. And then I watched the first one, and I was kind of like, it's okay, it's not the same.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you have to give you saw the updated, souped up version, right?
Yeah.
I feel like it probably wouldn't compare to the original.
Yeah.
And I don't remember how many years like passed in between Terminator 1 and Terminator 2, but I'm pretty sure like some of the CGI features.
Yes.
They got better, right? Like,
yeah, for sure. Yeah,
at the time, that liquid metal just was ridiculous. So, I mean, it was just like, what are we looking at? This is amazing.
Awesome. Love it. So I guess we better start wrapping up the show.
Oh, yeah.
As far as how folks can reach out to you, following you on social media, do you want to give a shout out to what your handles are?
Oh, yeah. So on Twitter, I'm at Van V Fields, although I'm going to move things over to IT Pro Mentor as much as possible in various places. I'm also on LinkedIn, so people can hit me up on LinkedIn, Alexander Fields. And I think that's pretty much it. I'm trying to get away from Facebook and some of those others. It's just too much. You can't put too much attention to all these different portals anymore. So pretty much just Twitter and LinkedIn.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Good stuff. And we will link to all that kind of stuff in the show notes as well. So I guess that's it for me. I'll sign off. You guys welcome to give any other shout outs before we close down the show?
You did a great job, Alex. I feel like since I'm new here, I'm here for moral support, and I just want to say good job.
All right, cool. Thanks.
I'm just at the hang of this at some point, but I was like, this is IT security, completely different fields. I'm thank you, because I learned a lot today too. This is really cool.
All right. Well, thank both of you too.
Yeah, thanks guys. We'll catch you soon. Cheers. Goodbye.
Take care. Bye.